You're on the river. Pot is 350. Villain bets 150. You've got top pair, decent kicker. He could have a flush. He could be bluffing. You've been at this table for 3 hours. You've watched this guy show down a few hands, and you think you have a read, but you're not sure. You replay the action in your head. The flop bet made sense for his range. The turn bet felt strong, but not crazy. Now this river bet. You think for maybe 10 seconds, and then you call or fold. Based on what exactly? Here's what most players miss. That spot has an answer. The pot is offering you 2.3 to 1. You need to be good about 30% of the time for calling to break even. Is your hand beating 30% of his river betting range on this specific board? That's the actual question. Not how you feel about the hand. Not what your gut is telling you. Not whether you want to see what he has. The math. And most good players never ask that question. They guess. They process the spot emotionally, make a decision that feels reasonable, and move on to the next hand. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong. And over thousands of hands, across dozens of sessions, this inconsistency bleeds money. Quietly, constantly, in ways they never track, because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It just feels like poker. Good players lose money because they guess in math spots. They ignore this math, and they pay for it daily. This video is going to fix that. Not with solver theory you'll forget tomorrow. Not with complicated formulas that freeze you up at the table when the clock is ticking. With clarity, the kind that turns "I think this is right" into "I know this is right." The kind that makes tough spots feel obvious once you see them correctly. By the end, you'll have benchmarks you can use tonight at your next session. No fluff, no motivation speeches, just the math that actually matters, explained in a way that sticks. Look, everything I'm about to share comes from mistakes I made over years of play. Money I lost. Edges I gave away without even knowing it. I used to feel my way through tough spots like everyone else. Call because it seemed right. Fold because I was probably beat. Trust my instincts when my instincts were basically guessing with extra confidence. And I paid for it. Thousands of dollars over years, donated quietly to players who simply understood the numbers better than I did. If that's you right now, sitting on break-even results, despite putting in serious work, this is your shortcut. Let me define what I mean by good player. A good player isn't a fish. They fold trash hands without needing to be told. They understand position. They've read a book or two, watched training content, maybe tracked some hands in a database. They know what a 3-bet is. They understand ranges exist even if they don't calculate them precisely. They take the game seriously, and yet they lose. Or barely break even after thousands of hands, or win at a rate so small it doesn't justify the time they invest. They grind 8 hours and book a tiny win that doesn't cover dinner. Why? Because there's a hidden leak most good players never address. It feels normal. It feels like poker. And it bleeds money every session without showing up in any obvious stat. They guess in math spots. Here's what that looks like. River bet comes. Good player thinks. He could have it. He could be bluffing. My hand is decent. The board is scary, but not that scary. And they make a decision based on feel. A vague sense of what seems right. The problem is that spot has a mathematical answer. The pot is offering a specific price for the call. Your hand has a specific probability of being good against his likely range. If that probability meets the price, you call. If not, you fold. But most good players skip this process entirely. They go straight to feel. Sometimes they're right. Often they're wrong. And over thousands of spots, the small errors compound into losses they never see coming, because each individual mistake felt reasonable. The difference between a good player and a winning player often comes down to this. Winning players stop guessing. They know the numbers, apply them automatically, and save themselves hundreds of small mistakes that add up to serious money over time. This is the leak you don't see in your database. It doesn't feel like a leak. It feels like normal decision-making. But it's costing you every session. Here's where the leak hides. Expected value. You've heard the term thrown around, maybe seen formulas with plus signs and multiplication, maybe nodded along in a training video without really getting what it means in practice. Forget the formulas for a second. EV is just a question. If I made this exact decision in this exact situation 1,000 times, would I come out ahead? That's it. Not will I win this specific hand. Not is this the right move this one time. But over infinite repetitions of this spot, does this decision make money? That's all expected value is asking. Simple example to make it concrete. You're getting 3-1 on a call. Based on your read of villain's range, you think you're good about 40% of the time. Should you call? Yes. 40% of the time, you win 4 units. 60% of the time, you lose 1 unit. Run that math over 1,000 identical situations, and you're profiting significantly. The individual outcome of any single hand doesn't matter. The pattern matters. This particular hand might lose, but this decision, repeated enough times, makes money. And here's where good players get completely tripped up. They make a mathematically correct call, lose to a two-outer, and immediately think that was a bad call. No, it was a good call that lost. Those are completely different things. The decision was right. The outcome was unlucky. Confusing these two is one of the most expensive mistakes in poker. I used to do this constantly. Make a correct call, lose to some miracle card, then second-guess myself for the rest of the session. I'd think maybe I should have folded. Maybe my read was wrong. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And then I'd tighten up in spots where I should have been aggressive, fold in spots where calling was clearly profitable. All because one bad outcome convinced me my entire process was wrong. The mindset shift that changed everything for me. Detach the outcome from the decision completely. They're not the same thing. A good decision can produce a bad outcome. A bad decision can produce a good outcome. Variance doesn't care about your process. But over time, process is all that matters. What matters is whether you're making profitable decisions consistently. Over enough hands, over enough sessions, the math sorts everything out. The wins come, the losses balance, but only if you keep making correct decisions, regardless of what happens in the short term. EV isn't about predicting what will happen on any single hand. It's about knowing what should happen on average, and trusting that average to reveal itself over volume. The math always tells the truth eventually. Your only job is to keep making correct decisions until it does. This next part is where good players donate money without realizing it. Pot odds. Let me show you with a real hand, because this is where the rubber meets the road. You're in a 2/5 cash game, playing about 300 big blinds deep. You hold ace-ten of hearts on a board of king hearts, 7 hearts, 2 spades. You've got the nut flush draw. 9 cards in a deck give you the absolute nuts. It's the turn. 1 card to come. The pot is 120. Villain bets 90. Most good players think, flush draw, I might hit, let's call. And they call without much hesitation. Seems reasonable. Feels like a standard play. But that's not math. That's hope, dressed up as poker strategy. Here's the actual calculation. The pot is now 210, with villain's bet included. You're paying 90 to call. That means you're getting about 2.3-1 on your money. To justify this call mathematically, you need roughly 30% equity. You need to win about 30% of the time for calling to break even. Do you have 30%? Let's count honestly. 9 flushouts gives you roughly 19% with 1 card to come. That's the turn to river percentage. Maybe you have 3 additional outs if your aces are clean, which brings you to about 25%. But even with 12 outs, you're still not hitting that 30% threshold you need for a profitable call based on pot odds alone. Here's where the mistake happens. And this happens at every stake level from 1/2 all the way up to nosebleeds. Players call anyway because they might hit, because it feels close, because folding a big draw feels weak. But that's not poker, that's gambling. You're paying a price that exceeds the value of what you're buying. It's like paying $10 for something worth $8. Sure, you might get lucky and it works out this time. But make that same mistake enough times, across enough sessions, and you're slowly bleeding money you never realize you're losing. Now, does this mean you should always fold flush draws? No. There are other factors we need to consider. Implied odds specifically, which we'll get to next. But the critical point is this. You need to know the baseline math before you start adding adjustments. Most good players skip the baseline calculation entirely. They go straight to feels like a call without ever checking if the raw numbers support what they're doing. The price is wrong. That's the framing that finally made this click for me. Every call has a price. Every price has a required equity to justify paying it. If your equity doesn't meet the price, you're overpaying. Simple, clear, mathematical, not emotional. If you remember one thing from this video, remember this next part. Sometimes the pot isn't offering you the right price right now, but the money you'll win on future streets makes up for it. This is implied odds, and understanding this separates thinking players from those who just follow charts. Back to that flush draw example we just looked at. Pot odds analysis said fold. The current price was wrong for your equity. But what if villain has another 300 behind? And you know based on how he's played that he'll pay you off big when you hit your flush. Now the math changes completely. You're not just winning the current pot. You're winning the current pot plus significant future money on the river. This is where real money is made. Understanding when implied odds justify a call that pure pot odds would reject. Finding those spots where the baseline math says fold, but the complete picture says call. But here's the trap that catches good players every single session. Most players wildly overestimate their implied odds. They imagine perfect scenarios. Hit the flush and stack him every time. Really, every time. What about when the flush card comes and he suddenly gets cautious and check folds because the obvious draw got there? What about when you hit your flush and he shows a bigger one? What about when the board pairs on the river and now your flush loses to his full house? What about when the action just doesn't develop the way you imagined? Because poker rarely goes according to plan. Implied odds require honest projection, not fantasy, not best-case thinking. Realistic assessment of what's actually likely to happen. You need to ask yourself, realistically, how often will I get paid off when I hit? Against a calling station who can't fold top pair, your implied odds are enormous, probably enough to justify the call. Against a tight-thinking player who can fold the river when the obvious draw gets there, your implied odds are minimal. Maybe close to zero. Against someone who might have a bigger draw themselves, your implied odds could actually be negative because you're the one paying off when you both hit. Quick note before we continue. If this framework is clicking for you, I put together a free PDF that breaks this down for table reference. There's also a $10 ebook for the complete system. Comment I want and we'll send a link. It's also in the pinned comment. Now, back to the lesson. The skill with implied odds is accuracy. not optimism. Accurate projection of future betting based on opponent tendencies, remaining stack sizes, board texture. Get this assessment right and you'll find profitable calls that pure pot odds would incorrectly reject. Get it wrong and you'll justify bad calls session after session with imaginary money that never actually materializes. This is where stacks disappear. Reverse implied odds. The trap that catches good players constantly. And it might be the most expensive concept most players have never properly understood. Let me paint the picture. You're holding Queen Jack of diamonds. You flop top pair with a flush draw on a board of Queen A3 with 2 diamonds. Feels amazing, right? Strong made hand plus a powerful backup plan. You're feeling good about this one, but there's something you're not seeing clearly. The board is paired, and your opponent, a tight regular who doesn't get out of line often, is betting aggressively into you. You call the flop, makes sense. Turn comes a brick, no diamond, no help. He bets again, sizing up. You call again, thinking about your equity, thinking about when that diamond finally comes. River brings the diamond. Your flush completes. You bet for value, expecting to get paid by his overpairs, or whatever he was betting with. He raises all in, that cold feeling in your stomach. Staring at the board, replaying the hand in your head, because suddenly your flush doesn't feel strong at all. He could easily have a full house with that paired board. He could have a bigger flush if he was on a draw too. You've hit your hand, invested chips across 3 streets, gotten emotionally attached to this pot, and now you're facing a decision for your entire stack with a hand that might be drawing dead. This is reverse implied odds. The money you lose when you make your hand but still lose the pot. The money that disappears precisely because you hit. Here's the thing most players miss. When you're drawing to the second best hand, you don't just lose when you miss your draw. You lose even more when you hit. Because hitting gives you confidence, makes you put more money in, makes you feel like you can't fold now that you finally got there. And then you discover that hitting wasn't enough, that you were drawing dead the whole time and just didn't know it. Second order thinking, not just what happens if I hit, what happens after I hit. I remember a session at Bellagio years ago. 5/10 game, decent action. I flopped middle set on a wet coordinated board, felt completely invincible, stacked off against what I was sure was an overpair. He showed the flopped straight. I walked outside into the dry Vegas heat, stood by the fountain for 10 minutes, and just stared at nothing. Replayed the hand 100 times. I wasn't unlucky. I walked into a trap I should have seen coming if I'd thought one level deeper. The fix is asking better questions before you commit. Before you chase any draw, ask yourself, when I hit, am I definitely winning? Or am I sometimes hitting into a hand that still beats me? If the answer is sometimes into better, you need to discount your implied odds hard. Sometimes the right play is just to fold and find a cleaner spot. Once you can spot traps, you start seeing where pressure prints money. That's fold equity. This is where aggression stops being optional. Fold equity. This explains why aggressive players have a structural edge over passive players at every stake. Every bet has 2 ways to win. They call and you have the best hand. Or they fold and you take the pot without showing. Aggressive players play both paths. Passive players only have path 1. Here's the bluff math. Pot is 200. You bet 150 on the river as a bluff. Nothing in your hand. For this to be profitable, how often do you need them to fold? You're risking 150 to win 200. You need folds about 43% of the time to break even. More than that, you're printing money. Less, you're burning chips. This is where reading opponents matters more than cards. Against someone who folds 60% of river bets, You can bluff profitably all day. Against a calling station who folds 20%, your fold equity is 0. Every bluff against them is a donation. Most good players understand this conceptually but fail to apply it. They bluff the calling station because he should fold. They check back against the nit because he only calls with the nuts. Both are errors. Read first, calculate second, act third. Those crazy plays you see on streams, often not crazy at all. The player calculated they needed folds 40% of the time and estimated they were getting 50. Profitable, not reckless. Mathematical. Fold equity is invisible profit. You never see it at showdown because there is no showdown. But it's real, it compounds, and it's one of the biggest edges available. Before we go further, I need to address something most players confuse. There's a difference between hand strength and equity, and mixing them up costs money. You have pocket jacks, strong hand, right? But UTG raised, you 3-bet, and they 4-bet. Now, what does their range look like? Aces, kings, queens, ice. Against that range, your jacks are in rough shape. The hand looks strong. The equity is weak. Now flip it. You have 9-8 of hearts. Flop comes 10-7-3 with 2 hearts. You've got a flush draw, plus an open-ended straight draw. 15 outs. Your hand looks like nothing. You'd lose at showdown right now. But your equity against most hands is actually higher than those pocket jacks against a premium range. Hand strength is what you feel. Equity is what you own. This reframe changes everything. You stop falling in love with face cards and start calculating actual share. You stop feeling weak when you're strong. You see clearly. I see players stack off with ace-queen on queen-high boards against aggressive action on 3 streets. They think, top pair, top kicker, I'm strong. But what does that betting range look like? Sets, 2 pair. Against that range, his queen is often crushed. The hand felt strong. The equity was terrible. Think in equity, not in how your hand looks. This is where commitment happens before you realize it. Stack to pot ratio, SPR. You raise 215 at 2/5. Opponent 3-bets, 250. You call, pot is around 110. You have 250 behind. Flop comes, opponent bets 80. If you call, you have 170 behind and the pot is 270. One more bet and you're essentially committed. Notice what happened. You went from deep to almost pot committed in 2 actions. The decision to play for stacks was made before you saw community cards. This is SPR, the ratio between remaining stack and pot size. Low SPR means committed. High SPR means flexibility. Here's the practical part. You can engineer SPR pre-flop, raise bigger with hands that want commitment, like big pairs. Raise smaller or flat with hands that need room to maneuver. Don't build pots you can't escape from with the wrong hands. I see good players get trapped constantly. Call a 3-bet out of position with a speculative hand, flop second pair. Now face a stack decision with a mediocre holding. They feel unlucky, but they engineered the disaster. Pre-flop professionals look at stack sizes before entering pots. They're imagining the flop decision, the turn decision, the commitment points. They don't stumble into commitment. They choose it deliberately. SPR makes commitment visible before you feel committed. Here's the good news. You don't need to calculate any of this at the table. Professionals don't sit there doing math while the clock ticks. They've trained benchmarks. Recognition replaces calculation. 3 benchmarks for tonight. Half pot bet. You need 1 in 4. 25% equity. If you're not winning 1 in 4 times, fold. Simple threshold you can use in real time. Pot-sized bet. You need 1 in 3. 33%. If villain bets full pot, You need to be good about a third of the time to break even. Against a pot-sized river bet specifically, if villain is bluffing more than a third of the time, call. Less than a third, fold. These aren't perfect. Edge cases exist, but they're accurate enough for live decisions when you don't have time to calculate precisely. Precision belongs in study. At the table, estimation works. 3-step framework when facing a bet. First, what's the pot offering? Roughly calculate. Is it half pot, 3/4, full pot? Second, what's my equity against their likely range? Estimate. Don't calculate 2 decimals. Third, does my equity meet the price? Yes, call, no, fold. Unless implied odds change the math significantly. Takes 2 seconds once you've practiced. Replaces the emotional guesswork that costs good players money every session. The goal isn't to become a calculator. The goal is to train these patterns so deeply you stop thinking about them. The math becomes invisible. Decisions become automatic. I need to talk about variance, because this is what actually breaks people. Not bad strategy, not lack of skill. Variance. You can do everything right and still lose. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. I've had stretches where my decisions were objectively perfect, and my results were absolutely catastrophic. Set over, set 3 times in one session. River 1-outers in massive pots back to back. Running kings into aces so consistently, I started wondering if the deck was rigged. That feeling of staring at the river card as it peels off, stomach dropping, knowing you were right about everything and it didn't matter. Knowing you made the correct read, the correct bet, put him on exactly what he had, and some miracle card came anyway. That's variance. And it doesn't care that you played perfectly. Here's what you need to understand if you're going to survive this game long term. Variance isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's precisely why poker remains profitable for skilled players. Think about it. Variance is why bad players stay in the game. They win sometimes despite making terrible decisions. They hit their miracle cards and feel like geniuses. They stack a professional and convince themselves they outplayed him. They start believing poker is mostly luck, which means they have a chance, which means they keep coming back with more money to donate. For you, variance is temporary noise. It obscures your true results in the short term, makes wrong decisions look correct, creates the illusion that nothing you do matters. But over enough volume, over enough hands, your actual edge emerges from the noise. The math always tells the truth eventually. It just takes time. The real challenge is staying sane during the noise. Most players can't do it. They run bad, start questioning their entire strategy, make changes based on results that were pure variance, and compound the damage. They let short-term outcomes teach them completely wrong lessons. Lose with aces twice, and suddenly they're playing aces differently, even though they've played them perfectly both times. I learned to reframe variance completely. When I'm running bad, genuinely getting crushed despite playing well, I tell myself, this is the tax I pay for opponents who don't understand the game staying in it. Because if skill won immediately and obviously every time, the recreational players would quit after one session and the entire ecosystem would collapse. Variance is what keeps the games good. Poker involves real risk. Bankroll management matters enormously, but the core skill, the thing that actually determines your long-term results, is making correct decisions regardless of short-term outcomes. Trusting the math, letting volume do its work. So here's where we land. Good players lose money because they treat math spots like feel spots. They guess where they could calculate. They trust intuition where structure would serve them better. You now have the framework. EV as a question. If I made this decision 1,000 times, would I profit? Pot odds as a price check. Is the pot offering good value for my equity? Implied odds with honest projection. How much will I really win when I hit? Reverse implied odds as a trap detector. Am I sometimes hitting into better hands? Equity as ownership. Not hand strength, but actual share of the pot against their range. Fold equity as invisible profit. How often does this bet win without showdown? SPR as commitment visibility. How committed will I be if I enter this pot? And the benchmarks, half pot, 1 pot sized, 1 in 3. Accurate enough for real-time decisions. Stop guessing, start pricing decisions. Apply one of these concepts next session. Just one, then add another. Let them stack until they become automatic, till correct decisions feel obvious rather than uncertain. I want to hear from you. Which leak cost you the most money this month? Pot odds, mistakes, implied odds fantasy, reverse implied odds traps. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this helped you see the game more clearly, share it with someone still guessing in spots where math could save them money. And subscribe for more content like this. No fluff, just clarity that translates into results. Winners don't guess. They price decisions. See you in the next one.